Alright, so it's finally time to pot up the peppers. These have been in here for about 2 weeks. And they've germinated and are starting to get true leaves. I like to transplant them when they're smaller like this. It seems to just be easier and they recover a little bit faster. When they have a little bit more leaf structure, they also have more root structure, which means more detangling, and also you put them at risk for not having enough water to transpire efficiently underneath these lights. So I like to do them when they're really small. They just jiggle apart really easily, and they have very small, easy to move roots. You do have to be delicate, but just don't be an idiot and you'll probably be fine. There it is. So what I'm doing here is I'm just making a little hole with the chopstick. This just makes putting the plant back in there as easy as possible. You could use your finger. I just like the sturdiness that this provides, and then my fingers don't get all dirty. Also, my fingers are kind of too wide for this, so your mileage may vary. So I just take it here, tease them apart, and if you look in there, so it's just the tiniest little root there. You gotta be very gentle, otherwise you're gonna tear that up. But even if you do, don't worry, because it'll probably just recover. If you wait longer for these and you tear up the roots, then it becomes a little bit of an issue, because the leaves need to suck up water in order to evaporate water out of their leaves. Otherwise, they wilt and die. So, boop. And here it is. The tiny, tiny, tiny plant. Teeny tiny plant. So doing it this way, I retain practically all of the roots. You could size it up right in the hole. And don't worry about pressing it in there or making sure that it's firm. Once you water it in, it's going to get rid of all those air gaps and bubbles. It won't matter too much. These seedlings are a lot tougher than people give credit. I know I just said I don't use my fingers, but this one has a kind of a clump here, so. These seedlings are a lot tougher than people give credit to. And will this set your seedlings back? Maybe. It doesn't really matter. I start these so early that it really, even if they're a week later, it just does not affect them. They're always going to end up catching up when it gets warm out and they get actual sunlight. So this does not matter at all. You just drop it in the hole. So I recommend when you first transplant them, don't just get a watering can and dump a bunch of water on there, because it's going to displace them. I give them a nice mist. You could bottom water, but it's likely to not reach where the water actually needs to be. So keep a spray bottle handy. So you might have noticed these trays are a little bit different. These are root maker trays. Now normally you would see some people use these for trees and perennials. I'm doing a little experiment this year to see if they work out for these peppers that I'm growing. So you can see on the very bottom of the trays, they have all these little pointed edges, and at the end of those edges are holes. So it directs the roots to grow to those, and then they air prune, making a dense, fibrous root system. Normally when people start these plants indoors like this, by the time you end up moving them out or getting them for sale, they end up a little bit root bound. That's not that big of a deal for annuals, because they just end up dying at the end of the year anyway, so the root bound roots don't ever end up strangulating themselves. But having an open structure like this makes transplant shock a lot less likely, because they're able to, again, absorb the water and transpire the water straight through their leaves and not get blasted as soon as they get moved out because of all the root damage that they might have. So I'm using those this year to try and figure out if that is worth it. And if they are, which I think they're going to be, then I am selling a superior product for people who end up buying the seedlings from me, which is awesome. This is not something that a large-scale commercial nursery or something like a big box store would ever end up doing, because it's too costly. But buy once, cry once. These are a little bit more pricey than a regular tray would be, but they last for years with good care. So hopefully they end up paying dividends. And another thing you might want to pay attention to is not packing something like this too tight. The natural soil structure is going to have some air in there. That's a good thing, because if you don't have air in there, it's compacted. And compacted soil doesn't allow space for the roots to actually grow. So you don't want to have this sopping wet when you're putting it in there. You also don't want to just jam your fingers in there to fill every single space as tight as you possibly can. You know, just a light tamping is going to do, just to make sure that you don't, you know, poke all the way through the bottom, that you didn't put enough cocoa coir in there. Another thing that I'm using inside of these trays is cocoa coir. I've used peat in the past, but what I've found with peat is that it's way more likely to become hydrophobic. As soon as it dries out, it just does not absorb water again without some sort of soil conditioner. So if I can sell this to people and, you know, they kind of neglect the plants a little bit, as we all do, well, it's not going to be too big of a deal, because as soon as they get water again, hopefully they're able to reabsorb it. But in the past, I've dug up some plants that weren't doing so well in my pots, and because I let them dry out, either I wasn't watching them or I went away for some time, there was just this mass of peat that was just not accepting water, even with soaking and all that stuff, which is annoying to do anyways. But I find that cocoa coir is just a better product for me, so I end up using it. Plus, it's really convenient because the peat comes in these giant bales, and it's compressed, but it's not dehydrated entirely. So these are the cocoa bricks that they come in, and one of these bricks fills a tray and then some. About a tray for one of these bricks in the 32 cells. In the 18 cells like I have here, it's about a brick per tray. So I could just count how many trays I'm going to be filling and then just order the amount of bricks that I need, and they store much more compact than a giant bale of peat moss, which I don't have the space for. So I end up just storing them just like this brick here. Anyways, I'm going to fill up the rest of these trays, and then I'll get back to you when I'm done so you can see all the little peppers in their little space. Alright, so we got all these potted up. I did end up having to have one tray that just kind of had a bunch of randoms in there. But everything else went exactly according to plan. We have a whole tray of habanadas, and then all the leftovers in this tray, and then all the other ones I was able to do, basically all of them, 2 entire rows, so 8 plants of each. There were a few that only had 6, there were a few that had 10 or 12, but on average, had really great germination, and yeah, I think we're off to a good start.